I'm Nicola, 32 female. I live in a quiet city apartment that has always been my sanctuary, a place filled with books on human psychology and the gentle hum of a well-ordered life. As a clinical psychologist, I spend my days helping others navigate their trauma, but I've always struggled to fully process my own. My past is a locked room, and for years, I thought I'd thrown away the key, only to have my sister hand it back to me attached to a wedding invitation. She was marrying the very man who gave me the scars, both visible and invisible, that I still hide from the world. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, a day typically defined by client sessions and clinical notes. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, embossed with the delicate silver outlines of two intertwined rings. My sister Chloe's elegant calligraphy was unmistakable, her loopy N in Nicola a familiar sight from a childhood of shared birthday cards and secret notes. But it was the name next to hers that made the air in my lungs turn to ice: Julian Vance. For a moment, the world tilted. The weight of the card in my hand felt immense, like a tombstone. I sank onto my sofa, my fingers tracing his name. It had been 5 years since I'd last spoken it aloud, 5 years since I had escaped him. Julian, the man who had systematically dismantled my self-worth, isolated me from my friends, and left me with a constellation of faint scars on my back that I still couldn't bear to see in the mirror. And now, he was marrying my little sister. My first instinct was primal, a surge of protective fury for Chloe. How could she not know? How could she have fallen for the same meticulously crafted facade that had once fooled me? I thought back to the early days with Julian. He was charisma personified, a marketing executive who could sell snow in a blizzard. He de-showered me with attention, learned my vulnerabilities, and then, slowly and methodically, used them as weapons. The charming compliments became backhanded criticisms. The protective concern morphed into suffocating control. He'd check my phone, question my friendships, and dismiss my feelings as overreactions. The arguments escalated, always behind closed doors, always leaving me feeling like I was the crazy one. The final night had been the worst. An argument over something trivial, me being late from a study group, had ended with him backing me into a corner, his voice a low growl, his grip on my arms like iron. A decorative glass vase on the shelf behind me shattered in the struggle, and the shards had sliced into my back as I fell. The next morning, he'd cried, begged for forgiveness, and promised it would never happen again. That was when I knew I had to leave. I packed a bag while he was at work and never looked back, telling my family only that we'd had an irreconcilable fallout. I was too ashamed, too broken, to tell them the truth. Now, holding this invitation, that shame curdled into regret. My silence, intended to protect myself and my family from the ugly truth, had inadvertently led my sister into the arms of a monster. I called her immediately. Her voice was bubbly, ecstatic. "Nick, did you get it? Isn't it beautiful? I designed the embossing myself." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Chloe, we need to talk about Julian." The line went quiet for a second. "What about him?" she asked, a defensive edge creeping into her tone. "Isn't it wonderful? I can't believe we're finally going to be one big happy family." One big happy family. The phrase was a punch to the gut. "Chloe, he's not who you think he is," I started, my voice trembling slightly. "There are things you don't know about my past with him." "Oh, here we go," she sighed, the joy evaporating from her voice. "Julian warned me you might be like this. He said you never really got over him, that you might be jealous." Jealous. The word was so absurd, so far from the terror and revulsion I felt that I almost laughed. "Jealous? Chloe, that's ridiculous. This isn't about jealousy. This is about your safety." I tried to explain, to give her vague warnings without betraying the raw details over the phone. I told her he was manipulative, that he was controlling. Each word I said was met with a practiced, dismissive response. "He's protective, Nick, not controlling. He's passionate, not angry. He told me all about how demanding you were, how you pushed him away." It was like listening to a recording of Julian's own voice. He had gotten to her first. He had inoculated her against the truth, painting me as the bitter, unstable ex. The conversation ended with Chloe sounding hurt and angry, accusing me of trying to ruin her happiness. I hung up, my hand shaking. He was doing it again, isolating another woman I loved from her support system, and I was the first one on his list. That evening, I called my best friend Maya Singh. Maya was a family law attorney, and her mind was as sharp and logical as her tailored suits. She had been the one who helped me find a new apartment 5 years ago, who sat with me for hours as I cried without ever asking for details I wasn't ready to give. I told her everything, the whole story, from the invitation to the disastrous phone call with Chloe. She listened patiently, the silence on her end of the line a comforting presence. When I finished, her voice was firm. "Okay, Nicola, first you need to breathe. This is not your fault. You did what you had to do to survive back then." "But Maya, I left Chloe vulnerable," I whispered, tears blurring the lights of the city outside my window. "I should have told them the truth years ago." "You can't change the past," she said gently. "What we need to focus on is the now. You can't force Chloe to believe you, especially when he's been pouring poison in her ear. Arguing with her will only push her further towards him. You need a different approach." We talked for over an hour, brainstorming. Maya's legal mind was invaluable. She spoke of documentation, of evidence, of patterns of behavior. "Manipulators like Julian don't change their playbook," she explained. "They just find a new audience. The tactics he used on you, he's likely using them on her. Your memory, your experiences, that is your evidence, but you need to present it carefully." The idea of going to the wedding felt like walking back into my own nightmare, but Maya was right. If I boycotted it, I would be playing right into Julian's hands, confirming his narrative that I was the jealous ex. It would sever my connection with Chloe completely, leaving her alone with him. I had to go. I had to be there, not as a guest celebrating a union, but as a silent observer, a protector in the shadows. I had to watch, I had to listen, and I had to be ready. The invitation lay on my coffee table, the silver rings mocking me. It wasn't an invitation to a wedding, it was a summons to a battle I thought I had already escaped. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for my sister. The week leading up to the wedding was a masterclass in psychological warfare, orchestrated by Julian with chilling precision. He was the one who called me, his voice oozing with a counterfeit sincerity that made my skin crawl. "Nick, I'm so glad you're coming," he began, as if we were old friends. "It means the world to Chloe, and to me, that you're willing to put the past behind us." The past. He said the words so casually, as if referring to a forgotten lunch date, not the systematic erosion of my soul. I kept my voice neutral, a technique honed through years of clinical practice. "I'm coming for my sister, Julian." There was a beat of silence, and I could almost feel him recalibrating. "Of course," he said, his tone shifting to one of magnanimous understanding. "And I want to assure you, I've grown a lot since we were together. I was young, foolish. I hope one day you can forgive me." It was a textbook move, a vague, non-apology that admitted no specific wrongdoing, designed to make me seem unreasonable if I didn't accept it. He was laying the groundwork, ensuring that any dissent from me would look like a personal vendetta. He then launched into a monologue about how happy he made Chloe, how she'd blossomed with him. He used words I knew were hers, her dreams of opening her own design studio, her anxieties about her work. He was showing me how deeply enmeshed he was in her life, how much she trusted him. It was a veiled threat. I own her now. The wedding day arrived with an overcast sky that perfectly matched my mood. The venue was a beautiful, sprawling vineyard, the kind of place Chloe had dreamed of since we were kids. It was all so painfully perfect, a picturesque lie. As I walked in, I saw them standing near the entrance, greeting guests. Chloe looked radiant in her white dress, a genuine, unadulterated smile on her face. Then she saw me, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Julian's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her closer. He beamed at me. "Nicola, you look stunning." He stepped forward and gave me a brief, stiff hug. His cologne was the same, a scent that instantly transported me back to dark rooms and quiet, menacing words. My body went rigid. I felt a panic attack rising, the familiar tightening in my chest, the cold sweat. I focused on my breathing, grounding myself in the present. "You are not that 27-year-old girl anymore," I told myself. You are a 32-year-old woman who knows his game. Throughout the ceremony, I sat in the front row, a silent sentinel. I watched Julian's every move. I saw the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, the proprietary hand that rested constantly on the small of Chloe's back, the way he'd guide her with a firm pressure. She probably interpreted as affection. He delivered his vows with flawless sincerity, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke of Chloe being his savior, the woman who taught him the meaning of true love. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, and the entire audience was captivated. Everyone except me. I saw the subtext. He wasn't praising her, he was branding her. By calling her his savior, he was placing the responsibility for his happiness and his behavior squarely on her shoulders. It was a trap, and she was walking into it with a heart full of love. The reception was where his strategy became even clearer. He made a point of introducing me to his friends and business partners. "This is Nicola, Chloe's brilliant sister," he'd say with a wide smile. "We actually dated years ago. Small world, right? Thankfully, we're all mature enough to be great friends now." With each introduction, he was cementing his narrative. He was the magnanimous, evolved man. I was the old history, graciously included. Any move I made against him would seem petty and vindictive. During the speeches, my father gave a tearful, heartfelt toast. My mother dabbed her eyes. Then it was time for the maid of honor, me. My hands trembled as I picked up the microphone. My pre-written speech, full of generic well wishes, felt like a betrayal. I looked at Chloe. Her eyes were shining with hope, pleading with me to be happy for her. I couldn't destroy her on her wedding day. I couldn't give Julian the satisfaction of a public scene. So I played my part. I spoke of sisterly love, of shared childhood memories. I looked at Chloe and said, "May you always be cherished, protected, and seen for the incredible person you are." My eyes flickered to Julian for a barest second. It was a message only he would understand. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Later in the evening, he found me by the bar. "That was a lovely speech," he said, his voice low. "Very diplomatic." "I'm not here to make a scene," I said, not looking at him. "I'm here for her." "You know," he said, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I've always admired your strength. It's a shame you were always so sensitive. You took things so personally." The gaslighting was so blatant, so familiar, it was almost nauseating. He was testing me, seeing if the old buttons still worked. I turned to face him, my expression a calm, clinical mask. And I've always been fascinated by the intricate masks people wear. As a psychologist, it's a professional curiosity. I held his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. For the first time that night, I saw a flicker of something other than manufactured charm in his eyes, annoyance. The predator was irritated that the prey was no longer afraid. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Always the analyst, just try to enjoy the party, Nick, for Chloe's sake." He walked away, melting back into the crowd, the charming groom once more. I watched him go, my heart pounding not with fear but with a cold, hard resolve. The battle lines had been drawn. He had his narrative, his allies, and my sister's heart. I had only one thing, the truth. And I was beginning to realize that if I wanted to save my sister, I would have to find a way to make her see it, no matter how much it hurt. The wedding wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The weeks following the wedding were a tense, fragile dance. I tried to maintain a connection with Chloe, suggesting our usual Sunday brunches or coffee dates. But something had fundamentally shifted. Julian was a constant presence, a ghost on the phone line, a shadow in her apartment. If I called her, he would often answer, explaining cheerfully that Chloe was busy, but he would pass on the message. Our conversations became superficial and stilted, peppered with Chloe's glowing reports of married life. She'd gush about the surprise weekend trips Julian planned, the expensive gifts he bought her, the way he just knew what she was thinking. To anyone else, it would sound romantic. To me, every grand gesture sounded like an anchor, pulling her deeper, making it harder for her to leave if she ever needed to. Each story was a gilded bar on her cage. The isolation was subtle but effective. He'd plan elaborate date nights whenever Chloe and I had plans. He'd convince her to join his gym instead of her usual yoga studio, where she met friends. He was systematically cutting the threads that connected her to her own life, reweaving them so they all led back to him. I knew I couldn't keep making vague warnings. I needed to try one more time to tell her the whole truth. I invited her over for dinner, insisting it be just the two of us. To my surprise, she agreed. She arrived at my apartment looking tired. The post-wedding glow had faded, replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible tension around her eyes. We ate in relative silence, the easy rapport we once shared now gone, replaced by a chasm of unspoken words. Finally, I took a deep breath. Chloe, I need to tell you why I am so scared for you. I need to tell you what happened the night I left Julian. I started the story, my voice low and shaking. I told her about the constant criticism, the jealousy disguised as concern, the way he would twist my words until I questioned my own sanity. I described his explosive anger, the things he'd said, the names he'd called me. Her face was a mask of disbelief, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. He's not like that with me, she said, her voice flat. People change, Nick. You have to accept that he's a different person now. Abusers don't change, Chloe. They just change victims, I pleaded, my professional knowledge and personal terror merging into one desperate cry. He's doing the same things to you, can't you see? He's isolating you. He criticizes your friends. He makes you feel like you need his approval for everything. He's supporting me, she shot back, her voice rising. He wants me to be the best version of myself. You're twisting everything because you can't stand to see him happy with someone else. Tears were welling in my eyes. I was losing her. In a moment of pure desperation, I made a choice I had avoided for 5 years. I have proof, I whispered. He hurt me, Chloe, physically. She just stared at me, her expression hardening. He would never do that. With trembling hands, I stood up and turned my back to her. My heart was hammering against my ribs. My sweater, I said, my voice barely audible. Please just lift the back of it. She hesitated. I could feel her reluctance, her fear of what she might see. After a long moment, I felt the soft fabric of my sweater being lifted. I heard her sharp intake of breath. The scars weren't gruesome anymore. They were 5 years old, faded to thin, silvery lines against my skin, a ghostly tracery of a shattered vase. But they were there. They were undeniable. I waited for her to say something, to cry, to gasp, to ask what happened. Instead, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, she spoke, and her words were colder than any winter night. So you fell. You were always clumsy. I turned around slowly, my sweater falling back into place. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She hadn't just seen the scars, she had seen them and chosen to believe a lie. She had chosen him. He told me about that night, Chloe continued, her voice gaining a cruel confidence. He said you got drunk and hysterical, that you started throwing things, and you slipped and fell into a shelf. He said he was so scared for you. He blamed himself for not being able to calm you down. The lie was so perfect, so complete. It took my trauma and reframed it as my hysteria, my instability. Julian hadn't just hurt my body, he had poisoned the memory of it. Chloe, that's not what happened, I said, the words feeling useless against the wall of her denial. Her eyes, the same eyes I had looked into for comfort my entire life, were now filled with a mixture of pity and disdain. You know, Nick, I feel sorry for you, she said, picking up her purse. All this time I thought you were just heartbroken, but this is something else. This is a sickness. You're so obsessed with your tragic breakup story that you're inventing these horrible things. You're jealous, it's pathetic. She walked to the door. I think we need some space. I can't have this. This toxicity around me and my husband. And then she was gone. I stood alone in my apartment, the silence ringing in my ears. The physical pain from that night 5 years ago was a dull ache compared to the agony of this moment. My sister, my only sister, had looked at my wounds and called me a liar. She hadn't just chosen him, she had actively chosen to believe that I was crazy, manipulative, and jealous. Julian hadn't just taken my past, he had now taken my sister. I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around myself. The fortress I had built around my heart over the past 5 years had crumbled. I was completely and utterly alone. And a new, terrifying thought began to creep in. If he could convince her of that, what else could he convince her of? What would happen when his mask finally slipped and she had no one left to call? Chloe's words, "I think we need some space," echoed into a complete and total silence. My calls went to voicemail. My texts were left unread. She blocked me on social media. It was as if my own sister had ceased to exist and I had been surgically removed from her life. The pain of her rejection was a physical weight, a constant pressure in my chest. But beneath the grief, a different feeling began to take root, a cold, clinical dread. I knew Julian's playbook. The first step was always isolation. Now that he had successfully cut Chloe off from me, her most vocal and knowledgeable critic, he would feel emboldened. His control would tighten, and I was terrified of what that would mean for her. I couldn't just sit back and wait for the inevitable crisis call that might never come. If Chloe wouldn't let me protect her, I would have to watch over her from a distance. It felt uncomfortably close to stalking, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on me, but my fear for her safety overrode everything else. It started small. I'd drive by their new house in the suburbs, a charming colonial that looked like the epitome of domestic bliss. I'd see his car in the driveway at odd hours of the day. Chloe, a freelance graphic designer who cherished her freedom and her collaborative workspace downtown, seemed to be home all the time now. Her car was always there. My professional training kicked in, pushing past the emotional turmoil. As a psychologist, I was trained to see patterns, to connect disparate events into a coherent narrative of behavior. I started a private journal documenting everything. The date and time I drove by, the car's present, anything that seemed out of place. It felt obsessive, but Maya encouraged me. "It's not paranoia if he's given you a reason to be worried," she'd said. "Documentation is power. Dates, times, observations. Be a scientist, Nicola." A few weeks into my silent surveillance, I noticed the new security cameras. Not just a simple doorbell camera, but multiple high-end cameras positioned at every corner of the house, one aimed directly at the driveway. Julian sold it to Chloe, I was sure, as a measure to protect her. I knew it was really a tool to monitor her, who she saw, when she left, when she came home. It was an electronic leash. My concern escalated into genuine alarm one afternoon when I saw Chloe in the grocery store. I almost didn't approach her, but she looked so diminished. The vibrant energy that had always defined her was gone. She was pale, and there were faint, dark circles under her eyes. She was pushing her cart with a lethargic slowness, staring blankly at the shelves. "Chloe," I said softly. She jumped, her eyes widening in panic before she recognized me. Her first instinct was to glance around, as if expecting Julian to materialize from behind a display of cereal boxes. "Nick, you can't be here," she whispered, her voice frantic. "He tracks my phone. He'll know I'm taking too long." "What are you talking about? Tracks your phone?" "It's for safety," she recited, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. "In case something happens to me. He just worries." Her hands were trembling as she fumbled with her shopping list. I noticed she was buying all of Julian's favorite brands, his preferred snacks, the expensive coffee he liked. There was nothing on the conveyor belt that seemed like it was just for her. "Chloe, this isn't normal," I said, keeping my voice calm and low. "This isn't him worrying. This is him controlling." "You don't know anything," she hissed, her fear morphing into anger. "You're the one who is obsessed. You're following me now. You need to get help, Nicola. You need to leave me alone." She practically ran from the checkout line, leaving a half-full cart behind. She didn't just walk away, she fled. It was the terrified flight of a caged animal. That night, the focus of my observation shifted. It wasn't just about Chloe anymore. It was about him. What was Julian really doing? On a hunch, I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I looked him up online. His professional profiles were polished, his social media a carefully curated gallery of success and happiness. Pictures of him and Chloe smiling on vacation. Him winning some marketing award. Him and Chloe at a charity gala. It was all a perfect lie. But then I started digging deeper. I used my university's research databases, searching for news articles, public records, anything with his name on it. It took hours, but then I found it. A small news brief from a business journal in the city he lived in before he moved here. It mentioned his abrupt departure from his previous high-profile marketing firm. The official reason cited was personal reasons, a corporate euphemism that could mean anything. But the timing was suspicious. I cross-referenced the date with local court records, and there it was. A restraining order filed against him by a junior associate at his company. A woman. The details were sealed, The case eventually dropped after she, too, suddenly left the company. But the initial filing was public record. The accusation was workplace harassment and stalking. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just his playbook with me, it was a pattern, a documented, repeated turn of behavior. He didn't just get angry, he systematically stalked and controlled women who tried to leave him or defy him. He'd lost his job over it. This meant he wasn't just a domestic abuser. He was a potential criminal who had learned to be more careful, to operate in the shadows of a marriage where his control could be disguised as love. And then, the most chilling realization of all began to dawn on me. My own surveillance of Chloe's house, my drive-bys, it was amateurish. Child's play, but what if he had noticed? A man with a history of stalking would be hyper-aware of being watched. What if he knew I was looking? The thought sent a jolt of pure fear through me. It was one thing to watch from the shadows, but it was another entirely to be seen by the monster you were watching. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a single photograph. A picture of me taken that afternoon in the grocery store, standing by Chloe's abandoned cart. The angle was from a distance, grainy, as if taken from behind a shelf. Below the picture, a single line of text: "She doesn't want you in her life. Stay away." It wasn't a threat from a stranger. It was a message from him. He knew. He had been watching me, watching her. The game had changed. I was no longer just an observer. I was now a target. And he was stalking us both. The photograph on my phone was a declaration of war. The fear was instant and visceral, a cold wave that washed over me, leaving me trembling. He wasn't just controlling Chloe, he was actively monitoring me. The stalker was now being stalked by his old victim, and he was letting me know he was aware of the game. My first call was to Maya. I sent her a screenshot of the photo and the message. Her response was immediate. "Lock your doors, I'm on my way." When she arrived 20 minutes later, she found me methodically checking the locks on my windows, my psychologist's mind racing to build a fortress against both a physical and psychological threat. Maya, ever the pragmatist, brought her laptop and a legal pad. "Okay," she said, her voice cutting through my panic. "He's made a mistake. A big one. He's moved from emotional manipulation to direct harassment. He's crossed a line, and that gives us an opening." We sat at my dining table, the city lights twinkling obliviously outside. For the next few hours, we built a plan, a fortress of strategy and legal preparation. Maya's domain was the law. "First thing tomorrow, we file for a temporary restraining order," she stated. "The text message is evidence. His history, that article you found, the previous restraining order, that's supporting documentation. It establishes a pattern of behavior. We argue that your past relationship with him, combined with his current actions and his isolation of your sister, constitutes a credible threat." My role was to handle the psychological front. I knew Julian's profile. He was a classic narcissist with antisocial tendencies. His ego was his greatest vulnerability. He needed to feel powerful, in control, and admired. The public exposure of a restraining order would be a significant blow to that ego. He would lash out, but we had to predict how. "He'll try to discredit me," I said, pacing my living room. "He'll go to my family, to Chloe, and paint me as unhinged. He'll use this legal action as proof of my obsession. He'll say I'm stalking him, not the other way around." "Let him," Maya said, her pen scratching furiously on the pad. "We'll be prepared. We need to control the narrative. We need to get to your parents first. You have to tell them everything, not the edited version. The whole, ugly truth. The scars, the fear, the reason you left him 5 years ago." The thought of that conversation filled me with a deep, hollow dread. My parents were good people, but they avoided conflict. They wanted to believe in the happy, perfect family they thought they had. Admitting the depth of Julian's abuse would be admitting they had failed to see it, failed to protect me. It would shatter their world. But Maya was right. Julian would twist my silence into guilt. My only defense was the unvarnished truth. The next morning, armed with Maya's legal guidance and a folder of evidence, I went to the courthouse. The process was humiliating and terrifying. I had to recount the most traumatic parts of my past to a stranger, my voice shaking as I described Julian's control, his anger, and the night with the broken vase. The judge, a stern-faced woman who had likely heard 1,000 similar stories, listened without expression. She reviewed the text message, the articles Maya had printed. She granted the temporary order. Julian would be served within 24 hours. He was now legally required to stay at least 100 yards away from me, my home, and my workplace. It felt like a small, fragile shield. As I left the courthouse, I drove directly to my parents' house. I found them in the garden, tending to their roses. I sat them down at the kitchen table where I'd done my homework as a child, and I told them everything. I started with the day I met Julian and ended with the text message from the night before. I didn't spare them the details. I described his words, his rage, the feeling of being trapped. When I was done, a heavy silence filled the room. My mother was crying softly, her hand over her mouth. My father just stared at the table, his face pale, his expression a mixture of shock and profound guilt. "Why didn't you tell us?" my dad whispered, his voice hoarse. "I was ashamed," I said, the simple truth hanging in the air. "I felt like it was my fault, and I didn't want to break your hearts." That confession seemed to break the dam. My mother wrapped her arms around me, holding me tightly, apologizing over and over. My father, a man of few words, simply stood up, walked over, and put his hand on my shoulder. "No more," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He will not get away with this. Not again." Their support was like a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still bleeding. We called Chloe together from my father's phone. When she answered, her voice was wary. My dad spoke first, his tone gentle but firm. "Chloe, honey, we need you to come over. There's something serious we need to discuss about Julian. Your mother and I have learned some things. Nicola is here." There was a long pause. I could hear Julian's muffled voice in the background. Then Chloe said, "I can't, I'm busy." "This is not a request," my father said, his voice hardening with a resolve I hadn't heard in years. "This is about the safety of this family. I will come and get you right now if I have to." The line went quiet again. Finally, Chloe whispered, "I'll be there in an hour." The first brick of our fortress was laid. We were united. Julian had succeeded in isolating Chloe from me, but he had underestimated the strength of a family finally forced to confront the truth. The next stage of the battle would be fought here, in this house. We would wait for Chloe, and we would arm her with the one weapon Julian couldn't defend against: the complete, unified, and undeniable truth. We were no longer scattered individuals he could manipulate. We were a family, ready to protect one of our own. Chloe arrived alone, her face a pale, tense mask. She walked into the living room where my parents and I were waiting, refusing to look at me. She sat on the edge of an armchair, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. "Dad, you sounded serious," she began, her voice brittle. "What is this about? Is this another one of Nicola's attempts to ruin my marriage?" My father took a deep breath. He sat opposite her, leaning forward, his expression grave. "This is not about Nicola's feelings, Chloe. This is about facts. This is about who the man you married really is." He started from the beginning, recounting the story I had told them, his voice steady and filled with a father's regret and conviction. He spoke of the control, the manipulation, the isolation. My mother chimed in, her voice trembling, describing her guilt for not seeing the signs. I remained silent, letting their words build the foundation. Chloe listened, her arms crossed, her expression flickering between disbelief and defensiveness. "This is all ancient history," she said when they paused. "He's not that person. People can change." "Then let's talk about right now," I said, speaking for the first time. I slid a folder across the coffee table towards her. "This is a copy of a restraining order filed against him by another woman a few years ago for stalking. And this," I added, placing my phone on top of the folder, displaying the picture he had sent me, "is what he sent me last night. A photo of me in the grocery store after you ran away." Chloe stared at the phone, her breath catching in her throat. She picked it up, her fingers trembling as she zoomed in on the grainy image. She looked from the phone to me, her eyes wide with a confusion that was slowly being eclipsed by fear. He told me he saw you there," she stammered. "He said you were following me, that you looked unstable. He said he was right about what you might do. Did he tell you he took a picture and sent it to me to threaten me?" I asked gently. She shook her head, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her pale cheek. It was the first crack in her wall of denial. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. We all froze. My dad went to the window, peered through the blinds, and his face hardened. "It's him." A collective wave of dread washed over the room. Before my dad could stop her, Chloe was on her feet. "I have to go," she said, her voice a panicked whisper. "He'll be angry that I'm here." "No," my father said, blocking her path. "You're staying right here." The doorbell rang again, longer this time, followed by a series of loud, impatient knocks. Then Julian's voice, muffled but clear through the door. "Chloe, I know you're in there. Your father's car is here. We have dinner reservations, remember? Open the door." My father opened the door, but only a few inches, blocking the entrance with his body. "She's not leaving, Julian. You need to go." "With all due respect, Mr. Reed, that's for my wife to decide," Julian said, his voice still smooth, but with an underlying edge of steel. He tried to peer past my dad into the house. "Chloe, darling, is everything all right?" "She knows, Julian," I called out from the living room, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "She knows everything." There was a moment of dead silence. The charming facade was gone. When Julian spoke again, his voice was dripping with venom. This is your doing, you manipulative witch. You could never stand to see me happy." "Leave my property," my dad said, his voice a low growl. "I'm not leaving without my wife," Julian snarled. He pushed against the door, trying to force his way in. My dad, a man in his 60s but solid as an oak, held his ground. From inside, Chloe watched, her face ashen, her eyes wide with terror. This was not the charming, protective man she thought she knew. This was a stranger, a monster of rage standing on her parents' doorstep. "Julian, please just go," she cried, her voice breaking. His head snapped in her direction. His mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The face he turned towards the sound of her voice was contorted with pure fury. "You will come home with me right now, Chloe," he commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Don't you dare disrespect me in front of them." "A judge told you to stay away from my daughter," my father said, his voice dangerously quiet. "There is a restraining order. You've just violated it. I am calling the police." The word police was the only thing that seemed to register. Julian's eyes widened for a second. He took a step back from the door, his chest heaving. He shot one last look of pure hatred at me, a look that promised retribution. Then he turned, strode back to his car, and sped away, tires squealing. My dad shut and locked the door, his whole body trembling with adrenaline. He turned back to us, and the four of us stood in the silence of the aftermath. Chloe finally collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. She wasn't just crying for the end of her marriage, she was crying for the loss of the reality she had so desperately clung to. She had seen the man behind the mask. He was every bit the monster I had warned her about. My mom sat beside her, wrapping her in her arms, and I went to her other side, taking her hand. She squeezed it tightly, her knuckles white. The fortress had held. The first assault was over. But we all knew this was far from the end. It was a terrifying new beginning. The aftermath of the confrontation was a landscape of legal procedures and emotional excavation. The police were called, a report was filed for Julian's violation of the restraining order, and Maya immediately began drawing up divorce papers for Chloe. Julian, realizing he had lost all control, disappeared. He cleared out his things from the house while Chloe was staying with my parents, leaving only the keys and his wedding ring on the kitchen counter. It was a silent, cowardly retreat. But his absence was not a relief, it was a lingering threat. A man like Julian doesn't just walk away, he regroups, he plans. The fear of what he might do next hung over us like a permanent storm cloud. Chloe was a wreck. The swift and brutal collapse of her reality left her adrift in a sea of guilt, shame, and terror. For days, she barely spoke, moving through my parents' house like a ghost. She spent hours staring out the window, jumping at every sound. She was experiencing the classic symptoms of trauma, and my professional knowledge became both a blessing and a curse. I could diagnose her pain, but as her sister, all I wanted to do was take it away. One evening, I found her sitting in the dark in my old childhood bedroom. "I was so stupid," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "You tried to tell me. Everyone tried to tell me." And I wouldn't listen. I defended him. "You weren't stupid, Chloe," I said softly, sitting on the bed beside her. You were in love, he's a predator. He knows how to find good, trusting people and twist their best qualities into weapons against them. He did it to me, and he did it to you. This is not your fault. It was the beginning of a long, painful conversation that stretched late into the night. For the first time, we spoke not as a psychologist and a victim, or a savior and a saved, but as sisters. I told her every last detail of my time with him, filling in the gaps I had left before. And she, in turn, told me about her marriage. She described the subtle manipulations, the way he would belittle her design work while pretending to be supportive, the way he slowly eroded her confidence until she felt completely dependent on him. The patterns were identical. Listening to her story was like hearing a haunting echo of my own. In the weeks that followed, Chloe began her own journey of healing. She started seeing a therapist, not me, but a trusted colleague I recommended. She slowly began to reclaim the pieces of herself that Julian had tried to erase. She started drawing again, her sketchbook filling with designs that were bolder and more confident than anything she had created in years. My parents, for their part, were a rock. Their guilt transformed into unwavering support. They helped Chloe navigate the legal system, attended meetings with Maya, and created a sanctuary where she felt safe. The legal battle was draining. Julian, through his lawyer, fought the divorce proceedings, attempting to drag them out and inflict as much financial and emotional pain as possible. He tried to claim Chloe was mentally unstable, using my profession against us to suggest I had somehow brainwashed her. But Maya was brilliant. She presented the evidence methodically. His history of harassment, his violation of my restraining order, witness statements from friends he had forced Chloe to cut off. In the end, his posturing crumbled under the weight of his own documented behavior. The divorce was granted, and a permanent restraining order was put in place for both Chloe and me. The day the divorce was finalized, Chloe and I took a long drive up the coast. We didn't talk much, just watched the waves crash against the shore. The ocean seemed to understand, its relentless rhythm a metaphor for our own survival. We had been battered, pulled under, but we had not broken. We had found our way back to the surface. What he stole from me, Chloe said, her voice quiet but clear, wasn't just my time or my confidence. He stole you. He took my sister away from me. I am so sorry, Nick. He didn't win, Chloe, I said, taking her hand. Look at us, we're still here, and we have each other. That's something he can never touch. We started to rebuild our relationship, brick by painful brick. It wasn't the same as it was before. Innocence, once lost, can never be fully reclaimed. But it was stronger, forged in the fire of a shared trauma and tempered by a fierce, protective love. We were no longer just sisters by birth. We were survivors, allies on the same path. The scars he left on us, both visible and invisible, would always be a part of our story. But they were no longer symbols of shame or weakness. They were reminders of our strength, of our resilience, and of the unbreakable bond that had ultimately saved us both. We had walked through the darkest of valleys, but we had done it together, and together, we were finally walking back into the light.